Welcome guys, welcome to another Facebook Live. Today I'm sitting in my backyard overlooking the house and this view, doing this 7 Habits of Healthy People, episode number 3 or habit number 3. Sleep with the sun is today's message. I'm talking about sleep. Sleep is a really interesting principle because until recently in the mainstream they didn't really recognize lifestyle factors like sleep as important to health. It was just all diet and exercise. You know, if someone's got a health challenges that are related to lifestyle, doctors would tell them to exercise and change their diet. But there's been a shit ton of research recently, and it's come into the public light, I guess, that sleep is just as important, if not more important, than diet and exercise. And it makes sense because if you know, you can't just take away something that's been a part of our life for so long and expect that it's going to not change anything. But we've taken away huge amounts of sleep from people, from ourselves. Our lifestyles aren't conducive to sleep at all. And there's this kind of cultural mindset that sleep is somehow lazy, that we shouldn't be sleeping too much. You know, I watched this motivational documentary, motivational talk. It was part of a documentary with a speech by Arnold Schwarzenegger, and one part that stood out, he was saying, you know, he was talking about his goals and said, if you don't have enough time for sleep, then sleep faster. Basically saying sleep less so that you can get more done, which is the prevailing view nowadays. But I'm going to explain hopefully why that's not healthy and why it's not effective either, why we actually need sleep to perform at our best physically and mentally, and that when you start to deprive yourself of sleep, performance goes down. So the first thing, you know, sleeping with the sun. Our bodies are geared to sleep with the sun, and sleeping with the sun sets up all our other biological rhythms. Yeah. So when our brains are tied into the sun, and particularly the spectrum of light. So blue light stimulates cortisol. When we sense blue light, it elevates cortisol, which is our primary stress hormone. So when we get sunlight on our skin, it's not just our retinas that sense light, it's our skin. It's even in our ears, all have light sensors in them. So when the sun comes up in the morning, there's a lot of blue light, and it elevates cortisol. It stimulates the release of cortisol in our bodies. Cortisol is our primary stress hormone. It's what wakes us up in the morning when there's light to stimulate cortisol. As the day goes on, cortisol will elevate, and it peaks at about 12 o'clock. And then it starts to go down as the sun goes down, the light changes. So that at night time, when it's dark, we should have very minimal amounts of cortisol in our system. Cortisol is balanced by melatonin. Melatonin is the neurotransmitter that helps us to sleep. And cortisol and melatonin will kind of like the brake and the accelerator on the car. Cortisol picks us up, it's the accelerator, and melatonin helps us sleep. So when, ideally, as the sun comes up, we are stimulated by cortisol, and as it goes down, cortisol lowers and melatonin rises, and we start to get sleepy. That cycle has been messed up for a lot of reasons, light being the primary one. That we don't, as the sun goes down, we don't see a lessening of light anymore. We see sometimes an increase in light. Even when we start to switch on lights in the house, we have monitors. Just having your iPhone screen, it has a very blue light. You can get an app called Flux or f.lux that can start to dim it. And I think actually you have a dimmer on your phone now, but ideally you want to get rid of the blue light. So sleeping with the sun sets up all our biochemical and circadian rhythms, there are a few reasons that sleep is important. One is because it sets up your body clock. Two is that we have this like a lymphatic system in our brain called the glymphatic system, and the glymphatic system helps flush your toxins from your brain when we're asleep. And if we lack sleep, that doesn't happen, so we end up getting a buildup of toxins in the brain. So we need sleep for that reason. It keeps us cognitively alert. I often do talks for about my brain institute, and one of the other speakers is a sleep expert, Dr. Hummel Carrington. She does a really interesting talk because it's a corporate environment. She talks a lot about studies that are looking at things like memory and reaction time and productivity at work, in workplaces. And in one, she showed that for every hour of sleep somebody misses, they will be an hour less productive at work. So say you get X amount of work done in 8 hours in a day. If you cut out an hour out to get an hour extra work done, you end up getting the same amount of work done anyway, even though you're spending 9 hours doing it, because you're that much less productive. Another study she mentions, which is really interesting, which I found really fascinating, kind of funny, with, I think there were 3 groups of people, but one group hadn't slept for 36 hours. Another group had slept for 6 hours a night for 10 days, I think it was. Another group had slept normally 8 hours a night. And then they got them to do these reaction tests and memory tests and something like that. And then they did the test, and then they rated themselves. And the people who had not slept for 36 hours rated themselves as really poorly. They did poorly on the test, and they rated themselves as doing poorly. The people that had slept normally had done quite well on the test and rated themselves as doing well. And the people that had only slept for 6 hours a night over the 10 nights did just as poorly as the people who hadn't slept for 36 hours, but they rated themselves as doing well. So they thought they were doing well. They didn't think they were tired, but they were. So there's a lot of reason for sleep, for our brain and cognitive function, but also for our physical body. You know, when we sleep, we go into the most parasympathetic state that we can be in. Parasympathetic is the anabolic system. It's what helps us rest and repair and to grow new muscle and to repair old tissue. It's incredibly important, and we need it. G'day, Matt. So Olivia has asked, you've heard only 4 hours sleep is enough if your prana is high. Yeah, look, I think it's very possible, but I think I'm more interested in people living in Sydney and in the Western world who are living a pretty stressful lifestyle. You know, most of us here don't have particularly high prana because we're not eating well, we're not getting enough sleep, we're not having time in nature, we're not having time for ourselves to do yoga and meditation and stuff like that. It does take a lot of presence and a lot of practice to build your energy, and absolutely once that is high, you wouldn't need as much sleep. Yeah, hope that answers your question. So what do we do about sleep? So there are a few things. First of all, sleep, if you're having problems sleeping, that is. Sleep hygiene is the primary thing, which is just what are you doing leading up to sleep, and what do you do when you wake up in the morning? So first thing in the morning, we need to have natural light. If you wake up in the morning and you go and get some sunlight on your skin straight away and do some movement, you're stimulating cortisol, and you're indicating to your body that now it's time to wake up. Cortisol elevates and you're setting up your cycle for the day. Before bed, is important too. For a couple of hours before bed, or ideally as soon as the sun goes down, we want to dim all the blue lights. Get the app on your phone if you're going to use it. I just wouldn't even use it all after about 8 o'clock. Same with TV screens and computer monitors. We don't want them because they have, not only do they have blue lights, but they have a flickering light which stimulates cortisol as well. We want to look at like the temperature of your sleeping space as well. It's better to be on the cool side. If you're too warm, it's going to interrupt sleep a lot. We want to look at what you're eating before bed and how soon you're eating before bed. Cortisol is what wakes us up in the night. If you're not sleeping very well, it's usually going to be either because there's too much cortisol or not enough melatonin in your system. So you want to signal your body to produce melatonin. Usually when you wake up in the night, if you're having trouble getting to sleep, it can be because of a lack of melatonin, which can be for a few reasons. Usually if we wake up in the middle of the night, it's because of overstimulation of cortisol. Cortisol will be stimulated in the night for a few reasons. One, because it's too warm. Potentially because of blood sugar dysregulation. If you eat a meal that's too high in carbohydrate or sugar at nighttime, or if you haven't eaten for a long time and your body hasn't kicked into ketogenesis yet, and your body will stimulate cortisol in order to elevate blood sugar, and that can wake you up. So having a good balanced meal in the evening that's not too far from bed, but also not right before bed, having a good balance of protein, carbohydrate, and fat so you've got energy to get you through the night is important as well. Some people that are particularly fast oxidizers, people that burn through fat really quickly, might need to eat a fatty or proteiny rich little snack shortly before bed to get them through the night. Tryptophan as well. Tryptophan is an amino acid that's found mainly in whole grains, but also in white meats like chicken and turkeys, meant to be particularly high in it. The tryptophan it's a precursor to serotonin, which is a precursor to melatonin. So our body will use tryptophan, and through a process called methylation will create serotonin, and then through methylation again will create melatonin. So having tryptophan in your food at night can help you get to sleep as well. What else was I going to talk about? Sleep hygiene. Yeah, so alcohol at nighttime is particularly bad on blood sugar. Alcohol is like the fastest acting, most easy to digest sugar you can get. So having alcohol, even a glass of wine or a beer at dinner, is going to disrupt blood sugar a lot, and lead to potentially a cortisol spike in the middle of the night. Breathing is important too, and stress. These two kind of tie in together. So if you're stressed all throughout the day, you have a lot of stress hormones in your body: cortisol, epinephrine, norepinephrine, or adrenaline and noradrenaline as they're known. When they're floating through your system, your body needs to process those hormones and neurotransmitters, and different people, depending on your genetics, will process them at different rates. I process stress hormones really slowly, so I need a long time to wind down. And when I've had stressful days, I don't sleep much. It's like my body is still feeling stressed all night, and breathing is elevated. So it's important to manage stress throughout the day to sleep at night, and that means having regular breaks where you're just checking in with your body, becoming present with your body, and checking in with your breathing. The stress response is characterized with short, sharp chest breathing, as opposed to long, slow abdominal breathing and long, slow, particularly exhalation. So checking in with your breath throughout the day and checking in with your mind and making sure that you're present throughout the day can help to manage stress, so that when you sleep, your stress hormones are not so elevated. Stress, breathing, yes. And so breathing is another one. If there's inflammation, if you have food intolerances or something like that, anything that's causing inflammation, a gut dysbiosis or a parasite, which will cause inflammation, it can make it hard to breathe through your nose, and breathing through your mouth is going to stimulate the sympathetic, the fight or flight system, and cortisol, and stop you sleeping. Parasites and fungal infections and other forms of gut dysbiosis can release their own toxins into your system, which can create stress on the body and create agitation and create bruxism, which is like clenching your jaw, which are all going to disrupt sleep, obviously. So yeah, there's a lot of things to take into account, but it's really important that we get 8 hours of sleep. So ideally from like 10 to 6. I think it's about 11 p.m. or generally 3 hours after the sun goes down, we'll tend to have our biggest spike of growth hormone, which is really important for growth and repair, physical growth and repair. And if we aren't asleep at that time, my understanding is that we don't have such a big spike. And I think there's a lot of debate as to whether that spike happens later on during the night or not, or whether you just end up being depleted with growth hormone by getting to sleep late. My point being that sleeping from 12 to 8 may not be the same as sleeping from 10 to 6. And when you wake up in the morning, you want to wake up with that blue light. So getting sunlight throughout the day and then not getting light throughout the night is the primary thing. Having a little practice of getting light and moving first thing in the morning, having a practice for sleep hygiene, making sure your meals are balanced at night for sleep is super important. Staying away from stimulants. So caffeine is a big one. Coffee is massive. You want to just have those things in the morning when you should be on the way up anyway. I would avoid. I personally am really sensitive to caffeine, so I avoid it after 12, and that's just tea. I never drink coffee, but depending on how sensitive you are, I would avoid it after about 2 p.m. anyway. Stimulants. So the other big thing that interrupts people's sleep a lot, that a lot of people aren't aware of, is glutamate and histamine in food. So glutamate and histamine happen when food is fermented or slow cooked or aged. So aged cheeses, wine, bone broths and yogurt and sauerkraut and stuff like that are all particularly high in glutamate and histamine. Glutamate is the most abundant amino acid in the brain, and it's stimulatory. So is histamine. Histamine, we know about histamine from the inflammation, the inflammatory response that it causes, but it's also a stimulatory neurotransmitter in the brain. And depending on your rate and ability to process those things and the amount that you have in your diet and the amount that your gut is producing, they can be an issue. So staying away from anything aged, fermented, slow cooked can really help as well. You can supplement. So like, it's not a long-term solution, but it can help occasionally to have vitamin B6, magnesium, and vitamin B3, which are niacin. They can help the metabolic pathways that process those things. But it's hard. It is a hard thing. I'm doing a low histamine thing at the moment, in the low histamine diet, and it's really hard because those things, those fermented, slow cooked and dry aged foods are like the best stuff. That's pretty much my whole diet normally. Glutamate is actually what's responsible for the taste, umami. Like there's meant to be, I think, 5 flavors. Umami is the 5th one, which is Japanese for delicious. And it's why things like aged cheese and wine and Vegemite taste so good, because they're really high in glutamate. But it's also very stimulating if you don't process it properly. So I think that's everything that I wanted to cover. Thanks for tuning in, guys. Let me know if you have any questions. I'm always happy to answer questions here, or you can just write them in the comments box. But enjoy sleeping. Ciao.